Good evening, everyone. It is so exciting to see everyone here early, the place packed. I want to welcome you for actually the second to last event in the season this year. As you know, we have one more event coming up. And tonight we'll do something a little different, as you probably have gathered if you haven't looked at your program, or if you've looked at your program. Tonight, in addition to having the Daedalus Quartet, a super fine quartet, bringing us some fabulous Haydn, one of his first truly important set of quartets, the Joke Quartet from Opus 33, and a ravishing Dvorak Quartet, which I mentioned to folks outside. This is my Dvorak vest. Whenever Dvorak's on the program, I wear this. We have something, a third piece, which is very special. We have a world premiere this evening from an absolutely fabulous, celebrated American composer. And what we'll do today is we have the opportunity to speak with her directly. I'll have a few questions for her, and of course we'll also be able to open up to you guys if you have some questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage a composer who has been described as the most successful female composer in history. Please give a warm welcome to Joan Tower. Joan, two things I want to do. First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to spend a little time with us. Secondarily, to congratulate you on this world premiere this evening. How does it feel to be a composer on the evening of a world premiere?
Terrible.
So I'm thinking it's kind of like giving birth or something.
I don't know, I never gave birth. Except to over 70 pieces.
Okay, so you've been in this spot before giving a world premiere. One of the things that you have mentioned that I think is quite interesting is, as a composer, you've worked directly with the Daedalus Quartet on this piece, and I think you even mentioned that to an extent they're almost co-composers. Can you talk a little bit about that collaborative process?
The string quartet is a wonderful world for me. I've been through practically all the worlds, except the vocal world is kind of new to me.
Can't hear.
Oh, the string quartet is a really nice world. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. And I've been through most of the worlds except the vocal world, which is still new to me. And the thing about these different worlds, the orchestra world, the flute world, the bassoon world, is that they all have different cultures attached to them. So when you walk into these worlds as a composer, you're walking into a certain attitude about living composers. For example, the flute world, and I hope there's some flutists. Are there any flutists here?
No?
Oh, there's one right there. Congratulations. I think flutists should be given the Nobel Prize because they not only are go-getters by personality, they run all the groups around the country, but they commission more works than any other instrument. Yeah, so, and then you go to the other end. I don't need bassonists here. They're really, really far behind. Sorry. Yeah, they're, and I've spoken to them, and they're like, why would I want to do that? I mean, it's an attitude. And then the guitar world and the organ world, they're all very different worlds. The string quartet is a very competitive world because there are many more string quartets, and the literature is huge and very big and very strong. It's a very strong repertoire. So they have to really know what they're doing in terms of creating a focus of style and ideas, and they have to make it their own piece of music. So they're very creative and like they're composers really. They talk about, well, should this dot be a short dot or a long dot? And they have arguments about it. The way I do in my head about my own music. So when a composer walks into this world and asks it for a change, they go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And I totally think that you should maybe you should do it this way. And they were already off and running. Whereas in the orchestra world, if you make a change, you're dead. What? You want to make a change? You don't know what you're doing? It's a different attitude. It's a whole different culture, the orchestra world. So that's a long answer, sorry.
No, that's a wonderful answer. One of the things that our audience may not know is you had a very successful career as a chamber player yourself. As I recall, you played for about 15 years with the Da Capo Chamber Players as pianist. And I'm wondering if you want to talk, I'm guessing that suggests you're partial to chamber music, or at least intimately connected with it. Maybe talk about that experience of playing for 15 years and what that's given to your music, particularly the quartet music.
I love chamber music because of that experience. And it also put me on the other side of the page. And as a composer, when I go into a chamber music situation, I know what their problems are because I've been there. Now, I've been on the other side with composers who are asking you impossible things, and so it's a very good experience and totally important for a composer to be a performer, and vice versa, for a performer to be a composer. The separation of those two people has been very significant historically. It's had a huge effect on how we view music. So the performer has been elevated in the last century. So, it's Joshua Bell, period. Maybe plays Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, all dead, of course. So the composer has been, in a way, has sort of been de-emphasized, and the performer has been elevated. And that's not been a healthy situation, actually, because we need to keep music moving forward. We can't keep it in the museum forever. And the fact that I'm being played next to Beethoven, actually, this is going to sound really weird. It helps Beethoven. I never thought I'd say that. Actually, I never want to be next to Beethoven, but because he's my favorite composer. I've certainly learned more from him than anybody else. But you see, when you hear my music, you feel empowered to criticize. You go, or I don't like that, that's too loud, or that's too dissonant, or that's too this. But with Beethoven, you don't do that. You kind of sit there going, oh, this is so great. Like that second one. No, never mind. You're more intimidated by Beethoven, right? Now Beethoven has some pieces that are not all that interesting. You don't hear them because they're not played very much. It's the great pieces that have surfaced. But there's a lot of stuff that he wrote that's really not that. I mean, it's really. I'm sorry. You know how much I love you. So, anyways.
Yes.
Well, so you said you've learned the most from Beethoven, and maybe he's inspired you. What I'm sure everyone in the house would want to know: when in your life did it strike you that you were a composer and that you wanted to be a composer? When did that start dawning on you?
When about 3,000 people were playing one piece. It took me a long time to believe that I was a composer, actually. A long time. I never thought I could write music. It's very tough writing music. It's much easier to play an instrument. I'm sorry for those of you who are players, but it is. It's much tougher activity. I was probably in my 40s before I thought I was actually a composer. long time, long time.
But meanwhile, you had written a great deal of music up to
Yeah,
that point.
yeah. I had written a lot of music before I thought I was a composer.
I want to piggyback on that. We had the opportunity to chat a little bit last night, and one of the many things you do is you now teach composers. I think you've been teaching at Bard for many, many years. And you made a very interesting comment that I'd like you to elaborate on. You said, in a way, you can't really teach someone to compose. So can you comment on that a little bit?
You can teach an instrument much easier because you can say that here's the goal, and can you play this at 120 or at the speed. There are much more simpler parameters for teaching an instrument than there are for composing. Composing is so much involved with the voice of the person, which is very complicated, and it takes a long time. And I don't think you can actually teach composition, but I think you can be a traffic cop, which I am. And what I do is I set up hearing situations, because I think hearing the music played well is the best teacher for a young student. That's the best kind of learning experience. If they've put in a lot of effort into writing this piece, making it their own, and really caring about it, and somebody plays it with that same care, boy, the information is very high. They learn more from that than any books or anything I can say. So that's what I do. I'm sort of like but I am an important coach, traffic cop, because I know how to do it now with my students, and I love it. It's the most beautiful activity next to hearing a good piece of mine.
Another question that's related to that, and I don't want this to be cliche, but I'm curious about it. As a female composer in the late 50s, early 60s, did you face some challenges? Was it necessarily more male-dominated? Did you have special obstacles to overcome, or not?
It's always been male-dominated. Music is the most male-dominated art there is. And the history of that's very curious, a very interesting history. And female composers didn't really come into existence. Well, they discovered Hildegard von Bingen she was a visionary convent director. She was quite unusual. So, and her stuff was kept because she was a member of the convent, and so her archives were, the research is there for her. Thank God she was in the Middle Ages, because then it showed that there were people after her, and there were people. And so all of those people have started to be uncovered in the 60s and 70s only. And we have biographies now of significant people from the 19th, 20th centuries. But it's been a long, slow evolution. And I had to learn about that history. It was very important to me to learn that, because I saw how I was coming in on the edge of that, which was important for me to know, that history. So we're still having troubles. I mean, how many women composers have you heard? None, right, okay. That's a statistic that's kind of telling, right? But then the next question is, how many living composers have you heard? So it has to be bracketed inside of that, because the living composer is having problems too.
So turning a little bit to specifically the piece we're going to hear this evening, another question I'm dying to ask you to just comment on are your work titles. And I made a little list of some of the ones that stand out to me. Tonight we have a piece called White Water, but you've written pieces with titles such as Sequoia, Black Topaz, Island Prelude, of course, Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman, Big Sky, Wild Purple. Just talk a little bit about your titles. The first thing that I notice is this connection to sort of raw natural forces, but I love your titles. Give us a little insight.
Well, it's more interesting to call a piece, you know, Black Topaz than it is to call it Piece for Piano and 6 Instruments. It gives it a window. And so these titles, I think about them a lot, but they come after the piece usually, not before. So the piece motivates the words, not the other way around. Same thing happened with White Water. Oy. This took me forever, this title. See, I was involved, Bill Viola's work is involved with this concert too, and Amy sent me his videos, and a lot of them are about water, and he's totally obsessed with water, and they're very, have you seen them? They're very interesting immersions, the whole process of water, being immersed in water. So I started thinking about this piece. It's a very loose connection, and I sometimes I don't like to talk about titles because people, they grasp onto it too much. But just very loosely, it is about masses of sound and sounds that are undulating. There's lots of glissandos, and the white is a kind of a heat behind that sound. It's okay. I have some good titles and I have some really stupid titles.
But as you said, you're not doing, you know, Piano Sonata number 4. So in terms of this piece tonight, again, at least to me, the idea of being a composer, where ideas and inspiration come from, number 1, and then number 2, what kind of process, to me it's utterly mystical. I know nothing about it. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, kind of from the point at which Amy contacted you and you began this process, talk a little bit just about the life of what you go through to compose a piece. Okay, what kinds of activities you do. And I'll remind you, one thing you said is you described yourself as a very slow composer. So give us a little insight into your world as you're working.
Torture. It's torturous. For some composers, it's easy, but for some it's not. I'm a tortured, but I know how to get around the torture now. I'm more patient with it. I'm more forgiving. I don't have the monkey on the shoulder going, "That's dumb. Don't do that." You know. I've gotten the monkey down to this very small chatterbox. I'm very serious about it. I take it very seriously. I compose like I go to a job, 4 hours a day, 1 to 5, and I'm very on time. Deadline, meet the deadlines. And I love it. Eventually. And then when it's played and it works, then I love it even more because then I get taken, you know, to Carmel. And I go by the sea and I go have a nice meal at the restaurant, you know, and I meet all these wonderful people. So I get rewards, you know, I get paid too. Yeah. So there are rewards, but the work itself is hard. It's hard. It keeps me very humble. So it's a nice life. You know, I can't get too carried away because it's humbling. You know, so.
I think it was, I think if I remember, it was Nadia Boulanger who said something like, "Don't go into a life of music unless you would die if you didn't." In other words, suggesting that it's very difficult. It's very demanding. Well, we're so glad that you're doing it because, again, you've been a very successful composer, awarded, and we're very proud to have you here with us, and we're very excited to hear your piece tonight. I'd love to open it up. We have, let me just see, just about 10 minutes or so. I'd love to see if anyone in the house has a question they'd like to put to Joan. And if you, you know, if I call on you and have a question, we'll try to not do the mic thing, just speak loudly, and then we'll let Joan respond. So who has a question?
I have. I wrote a children's piece called Can I for a children's chorus, the Transient Glory in New York. Fantastic multicultural youth chorus. 13 to 18, and I revised a piece, and it was just done at Carnegie recently. And it's a funny story. I don't, the mix of words and music is very difficult for me. It's a strange challenge for a lot of composers, not just me. Beethoven hated it because there are two meanings involved, the verbal meaning and the instrumental meaning. So I wrote this thing, and it was about being heard. And I thought, well, a lot of children are not heard. So it was a kind of a multicultural thing. It had Latin things. I grew up in South America, and it had Jewish things, oye ve, and oye me, and it was kind of theatrical and kind of a narrative. And this little skinny kid raised his hand at the first, one of the last rehearsals, and he said, "Miss Tower, did you have a troubled childhood?" And it was like two missiles that just hit my heart. And I recovered really fast, and I said to him, and to all of them, I said, I threw it back at them, and I said, "How many of you here have mothers who talk too much?" 80% of the hands went up. So that was my first vocal experience, and it's getting better. I have to write another choral piece, kicking and screaming. But then I wrote, Dawn Upshaw asked me to write a song for her. So I wrote her back, I said, "I don't think so, unless you want Over the Rainbow with a doo-wop backup." And she wrote back, "You know, I actually like that song." And I started thinking, that song has got great words in it, you know. So I did a whole variation on it. It's called Up High. I'll probably get sued somewhere along the line, but it's a kind of a sentimental, dipsy song, but it's kind of nice, kind of. Oh yeah, because I learned how to dance. You know, the Latins, they dance. And I love to dance. I'm a really good dancer. Also, I learned percussion because I had a nurse who would take me to the festivals. There were festivals every 3 days because they had many saints, but they were really interested in partying. And she was one of the main ones, and she was very good looking, and she was looking for a guy, so she would drop me off at the bandstand and go looking. And the band guys would throw me a percussion instrument, like a maraca or something. Ah, man, I was all night, I was having a ball, you know. My parents were not that happy about it. So the Latin experience was really important to me. I learned about rhythm. That's where it came from. And about how to think differently musically, too. Because I was doing the dwems, the dead white European males also, at the piano. So I was playing a lot of Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Beethoven, all the people you know that you love. So I had these two things going simultaneously, the Latin culture and the dead white European males. Think of a risk when you take a risk in life, right? What happens when you take that risk? Consequences, usually, right? But often it helps you identify something about yourself because you've put yourself a little bit outside the box, so you've stretched your muscles a little bit to identify something that you didn't know about yourself. Well, it's the same thing in music. But in music, it's complicated. It has to do with, okay, so I'm going to do a long note here, right? And a really long note would be a risk.
I'm sorry, that was me.
I thought there was a church around here.
Yes, go ahead.
No, so it's in music, it's pretty complicated what that is. But you know it when you take it, and then the problem is what happens next. Because I have students, I think I mentioned this yesterday, they'll take a risk and then they'll back off and then they'll go on with something boring. But you can't do that because the risk has already put the piece out here. You can't just bring it back. You've got to continue along the same risk line, or at least come back to it soon. It's a temperature thing. This is hard to describe. I'm at that stage in life where I don't need to listen anymore. I'm just kidding. I mean, there's so much music I love, and so much music I've learned from. I don't know where to begin. I mean, there's so much jazz that I listen to. I went to all the clubs when I was in New York. I was married to a jazz pianist for a while. And we heard everybody, Monk, Evans, the whole group, and it was a fantastic experience. And then I grew up in South America, so I heard a lot of Latin music. And then with the Duems, of course, I've been embedded with them forever, you know, playing their music and listening to it, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky. I like the composers that have narratives, let's put it that way, and take risks. So that's about it.
That's a lot of food for thought, Joan. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Once again, I want to congratulate you, and how special I know it is for all of us to have you in the house and to hear your world premiere. So I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for chatting with us. Joan Tower.